Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
good.
I had the board running for the podcast, but I usually play music when you come on for some reason. Today I went, I'm not, I can't do another
Well,
Rush
it was, if
song.
you'll recall, our first interview ever, I disclosed to you that I was from Canada. And the one
Yeah.
thing anyone ever knows about Canada, or the one thing they should know, the one thing I'm proud of, because there aren't as many these days,
Yeah.
is Rush,
Yeah.
the kind of classic rock group Rush. So you kept playing some Rush songs
Yeah.
and you'd
Throughout
keep
the whole
coming back to,
episode.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
No matter what we did, we went back to Rush. And
yeah,
I think at one point we went into the other woman that had all those hits, Soundbird and all those. Uh,
yeah.
I can't think of her name right now. It'll come to me.
Um, the one who sang River, Joni Mitchell.
No, well, Joni Mitchell is one of my favorites.
Oh,
I
okay,
play
yeah.
her all the time. As a matter of fact, it's funny. I was just listening to the whole album of Court and Spark like 2 days ago. And Serena always says to me, "What are you doing listening to that whiny bitch?" And it's like, except since Serena is British, she didn't say bitch. She said the C word, which they can
Yeah.
say,
Oh my
but we
gosh.
can't.
Yeah.
You know, like they get a paper cut and that's what they say. But we
Yeah.
can't say that in this country. All right. And so at any rate, it's like, it's Joni Mitchell. She goes, I don't care who it is, turn it off.
Yeah.
She can't take it. And what's her name? Ann, not Miller, and something. It's
I
not,
don't know.
it's not Anne
I
Frank. She was over in a
in
different country.
Holland. Yeah, yeah, not her. Yeah.
Yeah. You ever visit there? You ever see the Anne Frank
Oh
house?
yeah, yeah. In fact, it's kind of personal. My Bikman ancestry, they were Soviet Jews.
Oh,
And
really?
thankfully, yeah, they got out of there. Thankfully, some of them did, some of them didn't. When we really have worked on our genealogy, some of them died right there in Eastern Ukraine
Wow.
area, or sorry, Western Ukraine, close to Poland. But yeah, yeah. I mean, it's something I just gave. I was just in Israel giving a talk at a meeting there, and man, I just have such an affection. I'm not a practicing Jew. In fact, I think technically, because it's through my dad, I wouldn't even be considered Jewish by any stretch.
Yeah.
But seeing my grandpa and kind of the traditions with his faith and culture, it just really I'm really enamored by it. And so yeah, it was really touching for my wife and I. I was in Holland area on my way back from giving a talk about diabetes in Oman, and passed through Holland. I had my wife meet me there. So we spent a few days, and that was one of the sites.
Yeah, Amsterdam is just a special place, and the reason I was there was I was being paid to speak there, and I said, everybody's like, "What do you want to do?" It's like I that's all I wanted to do
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
was go and see, and I thought it's like, I'll go in there and see it for, I guess you just walk in and see it. You do the whole thing. They have
Yep,
the history written all around the downstairs and the whole thing, and
it's
every
very well
part of it.
done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it was, and I spent way more time in there than I thought. There was also that. Have you ever seen that human, whatever it is, where they take the bodies and they do this?
Oh,
What's it called?
they've like kind of peeled it away, and you see all the
Yeah,
muscles and stuff.
yeah, and all the
Yeah, I know what you mean.
vascularity in the
I
veins
can't
and the
remember what it's
nerves, and
called though.
it's just something living something or blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I can go and see that 5 more times.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Yeah, it really is. And God, I wish I could remember what it's called. There's books on it now. You can buy the books. So if I figure it out, and if you figure it out while we're doing this podcast,
Yeah. Yeah.
the living something, the living science or whatever, and it's people who donated their bodies. And when you see when they quarter the brain and they do all this different
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, it's when you're you or me, and this is what we did in college, cut on
Yep.
cadavers
In the
and everything
cadaver
else.
labs. Yep.
Yeah, and now you're seeing it in a way that you couldn't see it as a cadaver, because at some
Right.
point you're flipping through fat and slabs of muscle and things get confused, and this way you're seeing it almost in motion.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Just freeze
pristine. It's
dried.
pristine how
It's
well it's kind of
unbelievable.
presented. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, which brings me to one of the things I want to talk to you about today. The reason I wanted to have you on, you guys just got through a whole study on studying the brain.
Yeah.
Right? What happened there, Ben? You guys just finished publishing a paper. I say
Mm-hmm.
you guys. Were you in on that one
Yep.
yourself, or was that with someone else?
Oh no, it was my lab. Yeah, we had a collaborator lab here at BYU as well. But we approached this guy with our research question because he had access to tissue from, this is brain tissue, human brain tissue. So these were tissue donors. In the point of death, we were able to get access to the brain. And we had access to the brains from two different populations, people who had died with Alzheimer's disease and people who had died without, no evidence that there was any cognitive decline. And the question was, in fact, Vinnie, this is doubly relevant. I'm sure everyone has seen the recent news where the plaque-based theory of Alzheimer's has been totally upended, totally exploded, because we found out that the initial pioneering discoveries that launched this whole paradigm that Alzheimer's is a plaque disease of plaques accumulating in the brain was based on falsified data. It really made the news. This is just over the past few weeks here. And it was kind of end of July when all this hit the fan. And it's very validating for those of us who've been saying for a while, the evidence supporting the plaque theory of Alzheimer's just keeps failing. Every new drug that would come to market that would actually have been confirmed to lower plaques in the brain would do nothing to improve cognition in people. It wasn't helping the problem at all. And so we've been saying for a long time, those cynics in this area of science, that there's another theory here, and that's the metabolic-based theory. So it was with that paradigm in mind that we approached this project, and we basically did a screen of all of the genes involved in the two primary catabolic or energy kind of fuel burning processes of the brain, the ketone burning process and the glucose burning process. After all, those are the two fuels for the brain. Right. And we found in the Alzheimer's brains, every gene involved in glycolysis or the glucose burning was significantly down compared to the healthy brains, the non-Alzheimer's brains. In contrast, the ketone-related genes in the Alzheimer's brains, only one gene of about the 24 that we measured was down. All the rest were totally normal in the Alzheimer's brains compared to the normal brains. This provided a very strong kind of baseline foundational observation that supports what's already been seen. There's a guy in Eastern Canada who will test metabolism of glucose and ketones in the brain of people. Like in live living people, he actually is measuring their metabolic rate. I mean, it's some incredibly complicated and compelling work that he does. But he has found previously that in people with Alzheimer's disease, glucose metabolism is significantly down, but ketone metabolism isn't. And we basically provided this genetic justification that explains that whole thing. We find that there is this kind of significant, well, I would say catastrophic reduction at the genetic level, likely induced by lifestyle, that has compromised the brain's ability to use glucose as a fuel. Now, all the more reason then, of course, to allow the brain to use ketones, because that was unaffected almost completely. And that might be why we notice in people with Alzheimer's disease that giving them some ketones and boosting up their ketones with a ketogenic diet, it will improve cognition. It doesn't reverse the disease. It's not like they go from demented to totally normal. No, but they go from cognitive decline that's right here to better. You can measure this in real time, like within hours of getting into ketosis. I mean, this is all published case study reports. Their cognition improves. So that was a really cool study that we had published just a few months ago, and we've followed that up now, where we have literally just submitted within the last 2 weeks another paper. This one's looking at rodents.
Oh, wait. Before you get there,
yeah,
because I have questions. I want you to
please
go back because sometimes when you're talking, if I figure if I'm having trouble getting some,
please,
the audience
of course,
may have trouble.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the plaques. Explain how that plaques works versus the plaques of, say, we have plaque on our heart. Heart disease, you have this inflammation. What are you talking about when you? Yep.
Awesome. That's good. So the leading theory, we'll back up then. So a plaque is anything that has accumulated and it's not supposed to be there. That is like a general definition for any kind of plaque. And even now, the plaque that accumulates in the coronary arteries that would be implicated in a heart attack is totally different from the plaque that accumulates in the brain, like within the very substance of the brain.
Right.
But because they're both kind of an unnatural accumulation of something, it's called a plaque. So that's a kind of a generic term. And now the plaques in the brain, they're often called amyloid beta plaques or amyloid beta peptides or AB peptides. Those are all terms for the exact same thing. But basically, you can take the hippocampus out of someone. In fact, this has been done in humans. And another reason the plaque-based theory of Alzheimer's has been so challenged, has so many holes in it, is that they had found in humans post-mortem that there were plaques all over some brains that had no Alzheimer's disease whatsoever. These little protein, these little pockets of these proteins accumulated in the brain. And in other people who had really profound Alzheimer's disease when they died would have very little, essentially none. So just further poking holes in this theory. But back to the brain, the idea has been that you have these little accumulations of these little peptides, these little pieces of protein, amyloid beta peptides, and they were called plaques. And the theory was that these things are disrupting the kind of neuron to neuron connections, that they're disrupting the communication between neurons, which was disrupting cognition. And now you have a person who can't think very well and can't remember very well, the classic signs of Alzheimer's.
Right.
But that, again, you guys, just billions of dollars have been spent on plaque-based research because the theory has been plaques are the cause of Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, Vinnie, this idea was just highlighted even months ago before this finding came out that it was all falsified. Just like a year ago, it made headlines that the FDA had approved an Alzheimer's drug against the request of the special committee that the FDA had put together to review the drug. So basically, this drug is ready to go to market. And the FDA makes a special panel of scientists to review all of the evidence.
Right.
And this was an anti-plaque drug. So it had been shown to reduce plaques, and yet this special panel looking at the data found that it had no benefit at improving cognition. Even though it did reduce plaques, it did not improve cognition at all. And it was fantastically expensive. And so the panel voted no, the FDA should not approve this drug. But the FDA approved it anyway. And their reasoning was that they did not want to discourage further Alzheimer's research. And so they approved the drug.
Wait, hang on, go back. Was there any side effects to this drug besides the fact
well,
that
there's
it didn't
always
work?
side effects. I don't remember what they cited, but at the very least, Vinnie, the side effect is you're asking a patient to pay $6,000 a month or something for a drug that doesn't work. And
Well,
so they knew there was no sign of efficacy, but because they didn't want to discourage further Alzheimer's research, they approved it anyway. It went to market.
This reminds me of when I watch the Metformin commercial on television. It says it will get your A1Cs as low as 7.5. And I always say, wow, you could take this and still be perfectly sick.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't cure you of anything.
No.
And they even tell you, you may lose 10 pounds at the beginning of this. And that's all anyone hears on the commercial, right?
Yeah.
I play these commercials on my Monday show to show people what they're actually listening to. And after I play the part that says, hey, take metformin and still be sick.
Yep.
By the way, here are the side effects. And one of the side effects is death. But mention that, right?
Metformin is the most widely used anti-diabetic drug on the planet. And it's generally used because the one side effect you want, which is lowering glucose, is to some worth the side effects you don't want, like the damage to the intestines, like the damage to the liver, like the damage to the mitochondria. Vinnie, one of the things that gets me really amped up are all of these longevity gurus. I would call them scientists, but they've gone into the realm of gurus where they talk about how you should take metformin to age better.
Oh, there's one out there that I could name right now, but I won't because there's a lot of people who like him.
I know, same. But the problem is they are either deliberately or ignorantly overlooking the data. And more.
Yeah,
but they.
I mean, we know like they're telling me, a Tia just walks out of the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden he's yelling this stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute.
I know. Well, and David Sinclair, who's a very prominent longevity scientist, he's advocating this, and I look at that and I think, are you not aware? And I've shared this through my own social media. There is human evidence to show that when you engage in frequent aerobic exercise, you have certain mitochondrial benefits. Right. You make more mitochondria and they're working better. When you take metformin while you're also exercising, you literally undo the benefits to the mitochondria from that exercise. Because metformin is, for lack of a better description, a mild mitochondrial poison. I mean, it acts at a different site than cyanide does, but it kind of it does impact, it impinges mitochondrial function. And through a series of events, that's oddly how it can improve insulin sensitivity at muscle to a degree. But there are consequences, which is you're damaging the mitochondria and you're preventing them from adapting to aerobic exercise. And everyone would agree that exercise is a good thing to age well, but not if your mitochondria aren't working.
Yeah. All right. So we could keep going down that road, but I want to go back. I always go off on tangents. So we've learned two things, and stop me when I'm wrong. Plaques can cause a dementia and this sort of thing.
No, they don't cause dementia.
But wait, no, you said it could.
No.
There are certain people with plaques all over their brain, and they have no dementia whatsoever.
Yeah. So in other words, no. So that latter part of what you said is right, but it's evidence that plaques are not causal. So the plaques may be there, but they're just there. They have no obvious effect.
It was only a theory all that time. It was
only a theory, and it was based on bad data in the first place.
Wow. You see, I got it wrong even when you said it to me, because I thought sometimes they see the plaques and you have this problem. Other times people have way more plaque and no problem.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's exactly right. That is what I said. And yet, even when they give the person a drug that is known to reduce plaques, if they have a lot, it doesn't do anything to cognition at all. Ergo, plaques have no role. There's no convincing evidence at all in animals or humans that is valid and past the true rigor that shows that plaques are in any way relevant to causing Alzheimer's disease. It is not a plaque-based disease. It is a metabolic-based disease. Maybe some iron problems there too. I'm not going to say that it's purely just the brain becomes insulin resistant and it can't handle glucose anymore. Right. There could be some additional inputs, but it is not the plaque. The plaque theory is dead. It should be dead. We need to kill it.
Okay. So now let's talk about the ketones versus the sugar in the brain.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put it in layman's terms for the people who want to hear. Our brains can run on two things. It's kind of like a Prius. It can run on gas or it can run on electricity. We can use a battery or we can use fossil fuel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a hybrid. Yep.
It's a hybrid. So our brains, a lot of science will tell you that it prefers glucose. I'm here to tell you that my brain and the brain of a lot of people I've been working with over the past 30 years like this, once you get them going in the opposite direction and using ketone bodies, they find that a lot of things get better. Now, explain, you started talking about in the I'm going to call it the rusty brain, the people that had a problem, right? The rusty brain. You said the sugar levels were higher. Explain that. You said it, but I want the audience to understand. Put it in a card. Pretend I'm in third grade.
Yeah. So, but I have to come back to what you just said, but I'll come back to it in a sec. With regards to the brain being a hybrid and the preferential fuel, we have very, very strong data that we've had for decades that there is in fact a preferred fuel, and it's not the one people usually think it is. But I'll come back to that in a sec. Yeah. So our study from the human brains found that the people who had died with confirmed Alzheimer's disease had a reduction in the genes that are involved in the burning of glucose. So these were brains that could not burn glucose very well. And like you said, there are two fuels the brain can choose from. And unfortunately, the way the brain works is that insulin is needed for the brain to get all of the glucose that it wants. So if the brain is basically saying, hey, body, my metabolic demand is right here. Give me this much energy. And usually, because there's so much glucose flowing around, glucose will fill all that energy. It will be what meets the energetic needs of the brain. However, as the brain becomes increasingly insulin resistant, it can't get that energy from glucose. And now you get an energetic gap. This gap is at least part of Alzheimer's disease. The brain basically starts to starve. Even though blood glucose levels could be twice as high as they should be. And so it's like this It's like this metabolic version of the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, where it's glucose, glucose everywhere, but not a drop to drink. You know, that old kind of line, water, water everywhere, of the sailor who stuck at sea with all the salt water. So the brain is looking at all this glucose, but it can't get it because the insulin isn't working well. So we have this energetic gap. But
Let me give
remember,
you an example and tell me,
yeah.
all right, I have a V6 engine, right? The smaller engine, but I put two 4-barrel carburetors on it, right? So I'm trying to feed this smaller engine all of this fuel. And no matter how much fuel I keep putting in it, it doesn't have enough cylinders to accept that amount of fuel. So no matter how much glucose, if you're metabolically broken and you're insulin resistant, you don't have the insulin to meet the sugar needs anymore.
Yeah, no, that's it. Well, the insulin isn't working well enough. Everything you just said was perfect, except it's not that you don't have enough insulin. It's just that the insulin isn't working well enough. And so far from but even then, Vinny, you're not firing on all 6 cylinders. At that point, you're down to 4 or 3 or 2, you know, so the engine, as much as you have available to feed it, one, you not only can't feed it as well as it wants, but it's not even firing literally, you know, in this case, well, figuratively, it's not firing on all cylinders, right, in that analogy. But there is this kind of nitro line, you know, there's an additional fuel line or the battery line, which is ketones, and ketone use is uncompromised. Basically, the brain is saying, hey, body, I can't use this glucose very well, but I can use ketones perfectly. As much as you give them to me, I will use. But the tragedy is, because we live a diet, a lifestyle that's constantly spiking insulin, the average individual spends literally every waking moment in a state of elevated insulin, because they wake up when insulin has come down. Maybe there's been a hint of ketones being produced overnight, right at the very end, maybe a little, maybe a smidge, and they eat a starchy, sugary breakfast. They eat a starchy, sugary mid-morning snack, and then lunch, and then afternoon snack, and then dinner, then evening snack. And every time, by the time the insulin's starting to come down, it gets bumped back up. And anytime insulin is elevated, ketone production is turned off. And so the brain is saying, I can't eat the glucose. Can you give me some ketones? But our dietary patterns and habits don't allow the brain to ever get any ketones. But then back to your point, to finish this thought, there is in fact a preferential fuel. And to me, the evidence is obvious. We've known for decades from the work of George Cahill, this legendary kind of fasting starvation scientist, he found that the moment the person starts to fast, and this is only like 24 hours or so, the brain gets 70% of its energy from ketones, up to 70% of its energy. But what's so interesting, and why I say with such conviction that the brain prefers ketones, is that at this point, Vinny, you know, about 24 to 36 hours into a fast, glucose levels are going to be around 5 millimolar. And everyone, pardon me for using metrics. It's just easier in this example. You know, in the US, I would say it's around 80 milligrams per deciliter. So glucose is around 5 millimolar. And ketones are only going to be around 2 millimolar. So it's about half the level of the glucose, less than half the amount of the glucose. And yet, even still, the brain is using 70% of its energy is coming from ketones, and only about 30% is coming from the glucose. So if the brain has a preferred fuel, it's clearly preferring ketones, because again, even though ketones are about half the level of the glucose in the blood, it's constituting more than double the amount of energy given to the brain.
Interesting. How did we figure that out? Was that all Cahill that came up?
That was all Cahill. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating, Vinny. He was sampling the carotid, the arterial and venous blood going up, just straight up and back and to and from the brain. He was measuring the glucose coming up and down and the ketones coming up and down, and finding out that this much ketone would go up and only this much ketone would come back.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, very elegant studies.
Kind of rudimentary when you think about how.
Yeah, simple.
Yeah. I mean, it's like what, you know, because whenever we see people doing sleep studies and everything, we have all of this electrodes all over their brain now. And this guy was just measuring what was going up and what was coming down.
That's it. Yep.
Unbelievable.
Just the metabolic elevators of the carotid arteries and veins. Yep.
Okay. So we know that the brain prefers ketones. And I personally, yesterday I wrote a text to a guy, and I own 2 different houses. And I accidentally, the guy's supposed to come to my house, and I wrote him a text and I said, come to the house. He goes, what's your address? and I put half of my other address with this address, right? And I don't know how, but like an hour later, I went, wait a minute. And I don't know
Yeah.
what made me think about it. I
Yeah.
don't know what, I went back and I looked and I put the number to this house with the street name of the other house.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they both start with a C, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's about the only commonality. And it worries me. It worries me a lot because I'm turning 60 in a month. I played 13 years of football. I was a middle linebacker. There was some, a lot of concussions. There was a lot of,
Yeah.
got the old bell rung for 13
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure.
years. And I worry about that stuff because I know people who are older than me. The great Steve Stonebreaker, who played for the Saints. I knew the guy. He committed suicide years and years ago. And, I know a lot of other guys who have lost it, around this age. So when I do a little something like that, I'm always going, oh boy.
Oh no, I get it.
This is not good. Right.
Yeah.
But, my wife reassures me that I'm not losing it. She goes, look, you still walk on stage not knowing what you're going to say in do an hour.
Yeah. No, Vinnie. Oh man. I mean, I just saw my beloved grandma, my Baba, we called her short for babushka. The kind of the Russian for grandma. Yeah. She had profound Alzheimer's disease. I mean, she didn't even remember my grandpa, her husband, really by the last several months. I mean, it's just so sad. I'm terrified of Alzheimer's disease. And I sometimes wonder the same thing. I'm 45 and I'm thinking, oh man, I can't forget something. But it's important that we not conflate true dementia and cognitive decline with just, I'm really distracted at the moment. Right. Or I'm a little sleep deprived or, whatever. But Vinnie, my fear of Alzheimer's is reason number one why I generally adhere to a low carbohydrate fasting kind of protocol. I want to make sure that my insulin is low, and which is going to enable autophagy. All this focus on longevity, man. You lower insulin. Don't worry about protein. All the silliness about you got to cut your mTOR by cutting protein. That's just silly. I want my insulin to be down and I want my ketones to be up to make sure that my brain, which is my moneymaker, that it has no energetic gap. I'm not going to get by on my looks, Vinnie. If my brain isn't paying the bills, nothing's going to.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to.
You need your brain because nothing's going to happen over there for you. There's no modeling career.
Yeah, there's no market for a scrawny, bald, freckled guy.
Yeah, a guy from Russia, from Canada, no less.
Yeah,
with Russian grandparents.
Yeah, no market. Vinnie, I found the one girl who was just deaf enough to think I'm funny and just blind enough to think I'm handsome, and I'm not letting go.
And you got what, like 3 kids? How many kids?
Yeah, 3 kids.
All right, so. All right. Now, the first thing people are going to say is, man, they're talking a lot about ketones. Should I go buy some of these salts or esters and all? That's not what we're talking about here, right?
No. Okay. No. I mean, it's certainly an option. I'm not a shill. I have nothing to gain from this.
Right. Yeah.
But no. I mean, the simple fact is if someone can just fast or preferably follow a low carb diet, you're going to be making your own ketones, and you'll have the added benefit that every ketone you're making is coming from pieces of fat that you're burning. That's what ketones are. I mean, to kind of demystify the process, when insulin is low, which is an absolute prerequisite, there's no getting around that. When insulin is low, the body enters a state of fat burning. And normally, if you look at the cells of the body, it's basically saying, hey, body, hey, energy, my metabolic rate is right here. I need this much energy to survive, kind of like what I was talking about with the brain earlier. And so the body is using, the typical cell is relying on glucose and fats to provide that. When insulin is low, fat is providing most of the fuel for these cells. But when insulin is low for an extended period of time, fat burning can't stop. I mean, you literally start burning more fat than your body needs to burn when insulin is down. But of course, energy has to be accounted for. The laws of thermodynamics demand that this energy be accounted for. Well, it's accounted for in 2 ways. When insulin is low, metabolic rate can climb by as much as 300 calories a day. So you literally start burning hotter. Your engine starts idling. That V6, you're pressing the gas even when you're in park. When you're in neutral, the engine is idling at a higher rate. The RPMs just climb a little, about 10 to 20%. It's not like it's insignificant. That's like hiking, 5-10 miles or something. But at the same time, you're making ketones from all of this excess fat burning. And the ketones start dumping from the body. I mean, the brain's going to get what the brain wants of all that ketone. But the moment you start measuring ketones in the breath, or you're measuring ketones in the urine, every one ketone has a caloric value that's roughly similar to a molecule of sugar, of glucose. And now you're just dumping it out into the atmosphere, Vinny. So it's all this excess energy that the body can't stop burning. And it gets reconciled because we always say you got to store it or you got to burn it. So eat less and exercise more. That's kind of the mantra, right? And yet we now have introduced this third little energetic option, which is wasting. You're just wasting energy back into the universe.
Yeah. And by the way, folks, if you're listening to this and not watching the video, Ben keeps moving from his mouth, pushing from his mouth. That's the exhaust system of burnt fat. It comes out in molecules of water through your mouth. We all think, oh, somehow it magically comes out in your poop or something. That's not the exhaust pipe. The exhaust pipe, it's kind of like an outboard motor, at the bottom of the prop, that's where the exhaust comes out. You don't actually see it. It's not a muffler. Our mouth is the exhaust pipe.
Yep. And then when it comes to ketones, that's just an additional output. The ketones represent energy that couldn't be burned or stored, and so you just wasted it.
Yeah, it's a butyrate that wasn't used, and boom, it just comes right out.
Yep.
I love when we get to use big words. Butyrate.
Hey, you're the one who brought it out, man.
Hey, man. Yeah,
you whipped it out first.
Maybe I'm not as dumb as I thought I was. Maybe my brain is still good.
You got some butyrate in there.
I got some butyrate in my brain.
Some nitro.
Let me do a quick ad and then we're going to move on because you have other studies. I want to get back in. We've talked about this before, and I always remember this about you. I want to get into a little white fat, brown fat talk.
Yeah.
Because that's sexy and that's what the ladies like. But hang on just a second. Folks, you don't have to take ketone esters or ketone salts. But if you eat some of the stuff I make, the ultra fat, guess what's going to happen? Yeah, that's right. You're going to make some butyrates. That's right. You're going to have some energy. You're going to be able to make ketones. You're going to keep your insulin low. We make this product, ultra fat. It's medium chain triglycerides, which comes from coconut oil. We put a little nut butter in there in the form of almonds, and I make it taste really good because I put my own ultra salt in there. Yeah, you get some electrolytes. It's never bad to have electrolytes. Go check it out at nsngfoods.com. Now, even if you have a subscription, I have a special going on right now. If you put in my name, Vinnie, V-I-N-N-I-E, no Wemby, you'll get 20% off your entire order. That's even if you have a subscription. Now, here's the deal. This is a one-time deal. But once you do it, if you want to cheat, let me teach you how to cheat me. You can use your wife's email address, your kids, your neighbor. Oh, look, back to school. We know a lot of mommies put this stuff in the lunch boxes and everything else. It's not just for athletes. You can do all of that just by getting another email address and doing it that way. NSNG Foods, ultra fat, 20% off, promo code Vinnie, V-I-N-N-I-E. We're talking to Dr. Benjamin Bikman. He's been on the show several times. Ben, you've done studies. We've talked about this in the past. There's a lot of talk about white fat, brown fat, on and on and on. Again, I'm in third grade. Explain it to me.
Yeah. Yes. In fact, I'm thrilled you're bringing this up because that's part of what got me interested in studying fat tissue at all. It was learning years ago that all animals and humans included, we have these little pockets of fat. Generally, it's in the kind of what's called the thoracic cavity, like woven up around the clavicle, kind of at the base of the neck, and then down through the ribs a little bit, down through the rib cage. But these are pockets of fat that are in fact brown. If someone were to come into my lab and we took a fat biopsy of the brown fat and we took a fat biopsy of the white fat, which is the fat that you pinch around your body, the subcutaneous fat, it would look really, on one hand, one would look very kind of yellowish white, like Crisco, like margarine, because that's just pure fat, basically in those fat cells. And the other one would look very kind of reddish brown. It's reddish brown because it's so enriched with mitochondria, the brown fat is. And mitochondria, we all remember, are the powerhouse of the cell. That's the site where we're burning through nutrients in order to create energy. Well, in the case of brown fat, the energy takes the form of heat. Heat is an energy, and basically brown fat cells exist to create heat. And when we're babies, human babies have a lot of brown fat, and that's nice because they don't have a lot of muscle. And so if the baby starts to get cold, you'll notice babies don't shiver. Babies will, if you take them up out of the little bathtub, they got they got a lot of chub, so it's insulating them, but they have a lot of brown fat, and so it's creating a lot of heat, so they don't need to shiver. But as the baby starts to grow up, become a toddler, they start to get a little leaner, they start to lose some of their brown fat. Now they start shivering, and shivering becomes the main way of keeping warm. And also, of course, that's in adults too. But we all have some brown fat. And people who have more brown fat and more active brown fat are always going to be leaner and more insulin sensitive than people who have less, or it's less active. And that's because brown fat is this metabolic engine that is just, it has a high RPM. It is revving the engine, not that because it's going anywhere, not because it needs to produce work. Muscle has a high metabolic rate because you're expecting work out of it. The brain has a high metabolic rate because we're sending so many messages down the neurons, and that all takes energy. The brown fat, they're just sitting there. They're not doing anything. They don't actually need to work, but they're revving the engine anyway just to produce heat. And so if you can activate brown fat, you're going to be leaner. So that's why one of the reasons cold therapy is so compelling and such a metabolic benefit. But at the same time, now to bring it back to insulin and ketones, we've published this paper, including a paper just recently. If you put people on a lower carbohydrate diet that lowers their insulin and increases their ketones, both of those need to happen, and it does happen with the low carb diet, of course, it will help stimulate white fat to act more like brown fat. So basically, here's the metabolic rate of brown fat. It's about the same as muscle, actually. And about less, like a 10th or a 15th of that amount is the metabolic rate of the white fat, really, really low. It is the lowest metabolic rate of any tissue I know of, and we've measured a lot in my lab. And when you expose
that, a 15th of the brown fat, or muscle,
like a 10th
or muscle.
15th. Mm-hmm.
So it's really that much less.
Yeah. So brown fat's about 10 times higher than white fat.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. But what happens the moment that white fat is in an environment with low insulin and high ketones, it triples about. And so it starts to it never gets to the level of the true brown fat cells, but it gets to, it goes up 3 times. And when you think about someone who's got 100 pounds of fat, when you've gone up, 200% in the metabolic rate, well, I would argue that's a pretty meaningful amount. And fat cells do have a metabolic rate. I mean, it's admittedly low, but this plays into part of the metabolic boost, the 200 to 300 calorie increase that you have when insulin is low in people. And that happens in people. We know that. It's been measured. So this was a paper we published kind of following some animal studies that we've done where we can really get all the fat we want, and see what's happening. But again, when insulin is low and ketones are high, not only do you have brown fat firing on all cylinders, but then the white fat, which had only been firing on one cylinder, starts engaging 2 or 3 cylinders, and the RPMs start to climb. So it's a metabolic boost.
So I'm going to ask a more practical question that seems to come up a lot. I do these phone calls 5 days a week. People can call and talk to me, the whole thing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, a lot of these people started off, metabolically as broken as you get, 400, 500, 600 pound people. The average, if I had to give you a mean score, 375. A lot of these people that I talk to, it's crazy. And they'll lose that first 100 pounds. Now, if you're at 375, now you still have weight to lose. You're at 275, mm-hmm. and it starts to tail off.
Yep.
Right. And when I'm interviewing them, what I'm finding is that they were doing exactly what I told them to do, exactly what I wrote in the PDF. But then all of a sudden, they start listening to other things. That's very easy to do on the internet, and they start trying other things, and they start going carnivore or this or that, which inherently is not bad, but the protein goes way up and the fat starts to come down. You see, I had them losing weight on a high fat diet, 60% plus of the diet coming from fat and the rest coming from protein and any miscellaneous, if you ended up with carbohydrate, that was on you. But they would start taking in more protein. And my feeling has always been, well, some gluconeogenesis is taking place because you're getting more protein. And just recently, I even had a friend who decided, he was a carnivore, did really well but he wanted to get that six pack. He just wasn't there yet. He was getting close.
Mm-hmm.
And he started thinking, or he talked to a bunch of people on a carnivore diet, and they were saying, yeah, add fat, add fat. And he asked me, he goes, what do you think? And I said, well, I've been saying that all along. You know, I'm lean. I'm 60. I'm a 60-year-old ripped guy.
Yeah.
I don't work that hard at getting there. And people are shocked at the amount of fat I eat. It's a ton of fat. It's a ton of butter. It's a ton of marbled meat. It's just, you know, any truth in the statement I just made.
Oh, well, I think so completely. It's so funny, Vinny, for me to notice what's the trend that's happened in the low carb space. So about 7 or 8 years ago, probably 7 years ago, I was invited to come and speak at a low carb meeting. It was the first time I'd ever participated in the low carb community. I wasn't even aware of this. I had just started studying brown fat and white fat and how ketones affect it. And we just published a cool paper, and then this group reached out, and I spoke at the low carb meeting in Colorado. And I loved it. It introduced me to this whole community. And at the time, I was so interested by the obsession. At the time, I thought we're too obsessed with fat, and there's not enough of an appreciation of protein. And so I gave a talk the next year talking about how, well, look, we don't need to fear protein. Protein is good. It's essential. We shouldn't be kind of deliberately capping it. And now, Vinny, we've swung so, now I don't think it was because of me. It's just interesting for me to see the change, where at one time I felt like we were too obsessed with fat and there was no talk of protein. Now everyone, it's protein against everything else. And I look at this with such wonder and think, how on earth have we gotten to this point? The problem with the protein obsession is, one, fat is utterly essential. You have to eat it. And it is so satiating. But two, there are people, especially if they're type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic, who will have an exaggerated insulin response to protein. That's one of the dirty facts about protein. When you eat pure fat, insulin will do nothing. It doesn't move at all. I know there are some people in the low carb space who say that it does. I have literally never seen one paper that has shown a statistically significant bump in insulin over time with fat consumption. In fact, we're doing some of these studies in my lab right now, where they come in over different weeks and eat pure fat, pure carb, pure protein, and the pure fat does nothing to insulin. So I state that with some authority. Protein does have an insulin effect, and in some people, it's pretty significant. It can really bump it up. Now, eating it with fat can help soften that a little bit, but even still, there are some people who will have a significant insulin spike in response to protein, especially people with type 2 diabetes who have a bit of a disruption at the alpha cells, the glucagon-producing cells of the pancreas. And so that's this kind of insulin's opposite. The beta cells make insulin, which wants to lower glucose. The alpha cells make glucagon, which wants to increase glucose. And unfortunately, in the type 2 diabetic, they're both really high. And when you eat pure protein, they continue to kind of wage this big battle where the glucagon, which is spiking in glucose, spikes through the roof. And then insulin's looking at this glucose spike and it's saying, well, gosh, I got to do something about that. And so the insulin spikes through the roof. And so it's this yin and yang that are just caught in this brutal battle, rather than understanding when each should be up or down, as it is in the healthy person. So I very much appreciate protein, and it's one of my cardinal dietary rules that we should prioritize eating good protein. But I think we've entered this bizarre realm where people are just saying protein at all costs, protein, protein, protein. And I think we've gotten off track. Fat is our friend, and we should never fear it. And in many instances, we should be quite liberal with it.
Yeah, when it started coming around, and people I really respect, Sean Baker.
He's awesome. Yeah, I love Sean.
He's great. And Ted Naiman, I respect these guys, and they're talking protein, protein, protein. And I'm telling my group quietly, look, if you want to go down that road and see what's going to happen to you, knock yourself out. But don't go down that road and never come back, because you're going to start too much protein. As a matter of fact, people go, well, 1 gram per pound of lean body mass. And I'm always going, well, you better figure out what your lean body mass is, and good luck figuring that out. Number two, I always tell people, whenever you think you know what your lean body mass is, and by the way, hopefully someone hydrostatically weighed you, or you did it on a DEXA scan.
Yep.
Once you know what that is, I would tell you to go with 0.6 grams per pound of body weight. And they'll go, why 0.6? And I'll go, well, actually, I want to say a half a gram, but 0.6 makes it sound like I really thought about it and it's scientific, you know. But I really think that a gram per pound of lean body mass is way too much. I'm at my age, I keep muscle on. You know, I work out. I do a lot of aerobics. I love aerobics. It's my thing, right?
Yeah.
I do a lot of aerobics. I go to the gym. I just came back from the gym. I don't know if you can tell, but the bottom line is, oh yeah, I'm ripped. The bottom line is, even with all of that, I don't get more than about a half a gram per pound of body weight. And my lean body mass, I weigh 172. It's probably around 155. As lean as I am, it's probably 155. So when you do that math, half of that, right? We're looking at 75 grams a day on a guy that's working his ass off at my age.
Yeah. And that's easy to get. Yeah. You can get that easy. Yeah.
Oh,
especially if it's animal,
the amount of meat. Yeah. I mean, the amount of meat and eggs, I get way more than enough daily.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, that's how you stay lean. That's how you stay healthy, and on and on and on. I want to go back to something else you said. My good friend Adam Carolla is a big proponent of this. You know, he started just doing cold dips in his pool.
Yeah.
And then he went from there after he figured out, well, in summertime it's not cold enough, and he got one of these big ice machines in his house.
Yeah.
So he was telling me this at Gina Grad's wedding. He was like, I said, what do you do in the summertime? And he goes, they sent me this ice. Someone sent it. I said, what do you do? He goes, it gets down to like 38. I said,
yeah, this ice bath. Yeah.
And I'm like, are you kidding? Because when sometimes I'll mess up a calf muscle or something. I have to dunk it. I just get the big foot tub and dunk them in there. And that hurts. That hurt. Yeah. And I'm like, you do what? And I hear of these other people doing it. You know, James Nestor, who I've had on the show probably as many times as you. You know, he was the first guy to go find Wim Hof. You know, and do all that stuff. What's the truth behind that? Do you have any knowledge on the truth behind? And should I be doing this? Should I get myself an ice bath?
Yeah. So I can absolutely speak to some of the data. My interest in cold therapy or cold immersion was born from my interest in brown fat, because after all, if you have fat cells that are specifically designed to heat up the blood and warm the body, it makes sense that those become very relevant when the body's immersed in cold. So Vinnie, there are some known benefits, and I'll speak to the two that I do know. One is that cold therapy will in fact activate brown fat and help convert white fat to behave more like brown fat, not unlike what the ketones were just doing. In fact, it's very, very similar. Whereas ketones also are this kind of unique boost to adipose tissue metabolic rate, so too is cold therapy. So that's a very well-known documented benefit. But second, this one's kind of a paradox, but cold therapy will stimulate the immune system. And it's funny, right? Because we talk about like the most common illness that people will get is a cold. You know, that's just a term we made up because the thought was you're exposed to cold and you get sick from it. And so we'll call it a cold. But ironically, cold therapy, you know, maybe dosed appropriately, 3 to 5 minutes daily or whatever, it boosts the immune system, and the person is now more resistant to illness during cold and flu season, which nowadays everyone's worried about all year long. In fact, Vinnie, I'm such an advocate that I literally just this week got myself one called an ice barrel. So, you know, I don't have all of Adam's resources, but it's just this nice little, like literally like a barrel, like a keg, that you fill with water from the garden hose. And I just from time to time put in a bag of ice. It stays insulated pretty well. And every morning I will go out in my skivvies to my back patio and just climb into this thing and go under, then sit in there kind of up to my chin for about 3 to 5 minutes. I literally just started it last week. Man, I'm loving it. Truly. And I'm pretty skeptical. I really try to not get caught up in assuming too much benefit to something or harm, but I'm absolutely sleeping better as well. And that's saying something, because I'm naturally a pretty terrible sleeper. I think there's something about I'm up, the sun is rising, I go get into this cold little dip. And of course, come winter in Utah, I won't need to put any ice in it at all. But I'm loving it. I swear by it. And I'm going to keep doing it. Adam and you got to join the fun. Vinnie, the water is nice. Come take a dip.
There's a woman, she's been on the show. You can find her on Instagram. Her name is Ann Happel. And Ann lives up, I want to say it's in cold area. I want to say North or South Dakota or somewhere where it's really cold.
Yeah.
And she goes out in a bikini. She shows it every day. And Ann is like my age. I'm 60. She's got to be like 57, 58. She's got an incredible body. And, you know, it's funny to watch because sometimes she's in a bikini and she's on her hands and knees breaking ice to get into a river.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sitting there going, I know she survived because she took the video.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I even said, does your husband go out there with it? She goes, no, I just put in a little tripod and she gets in the water. And
I admire that. I don't know that I'd do that.
She's nuts. She's nuts. And she does it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, good for her. What a gal. My gosh. But I mean, there you go. I mean, she's another good testament to how well it can work.
Well, I got to stop playing around with it. You know, everyone
Well, you ought to just give it a try. I mean, go up to Adam's place at the very least. I know
no, because I'm gonna look like a wimp getting into his. Hey, can I use your ice bath? Yeah, I could just leave my pool open for an extra month if it gets cold and just go in my own pool. I'll never get in it anyway. Might as well.
No, you're absolutely right. Yep.
You know,
give it a try, man.
Now, would it work the same? You know, let's say, you know, it gets cold here. I wake up in the morning, all winter is usually at least 30 or 32. It gets down to 20. If I just walked outside on my patio in just my gym shorts and just
no, it won't work. It's not the same because when you're in open air, you create what's called a heat bubble, you know, which everyone can already understand. You just don't have that loss, that kind of convection of the cold versus heat. But when it's direct cold, direct on the skin in the form of the water, it's this kind of conductive heat loss and you lose it much more rapidly.
So I can't just walk outside and hang out, huh?
No.
Oh, man. All right. I'll try it.
Time to take it to the next level, Vinny.
I can't believe Corolla's better than me at something. Damn it. No, that really bothers me. And
hey, he's got a better voice.
Everyone's got a better voice than me. That's not hard.
No, I'm kidding, dude.
Sounds like a chainsaw. All right. So it will up the brown fat and it will bring the white fat to a level.
It'll boost it up like about
for how
closer.
long, man? For how long?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
No one knows.
So well, I'm kind of scratching my brain. It'll be at least a couple hours where the fat tissue stays activated for longer. Yeah, at least.
Even for a guy like me and a guy like you, very lean people.
Yep. Brown fat, once it's turned on, that engine is revving and it'll take a little time for it to tone back down to normal. Naturally, the sooner you get hot, the faster it'll turn off.
Right.
But if you kind of, you're in there for 5 minutes and you don't immediately go into a sauna or you don't immediately take a warm shower, it'll stay on longer.
Interesting. Yeah, because I thought about doing the thing. I have this little house back here. I thought about turning it into a sauna.
Oh, man.
Kind of doing the back and forth.
That's my dream. That's my dream is to have a sauna at my house. A little old kind of traditional Finnish sauna where you can put some water on the rocks. Oh, my gosh. It's my dream.
Yeah, I will have one at some point. I'm building a kayak right now. Once I'm done with my kayak, I'm going to build myself a sauna.
Good for you. That's
awesome. I want one so badly. Yeah,
same.
Yeah. Year round.
Now, sauna has different effects. The sauna effect isn't so much a metabolic effect as it is a cardiovascular effect, where when you and others, but at the very least, when the body starts to get that level of heat, it turns on what's called heat shock proteins. Heat shock proteins induce a dramatic vasodilation, so blood flow and blood pressure will be greatly improved, and it will stimulate autophagy, which everyone always is raving about with regards to longevity benefits. So yeah, I'm an advocate of the extremes. Get a little uncomfortable, get a little hot sometimes, get a little cold sometimes.
We're going to finish this by you talking a little bit about autophagy, and you mentioned early on in this conversation, you've mentioned it before. To fast, and you mentioned the 24-hour fast. Talk about fasting. Now, the problem I have with fasting is everyone turns it into hey, it's a quick way to lose weight. You know, and the
Yeah.
whole,
Oh, no, no,
this is
good for
not
you.
diet trickery. Talk about autophagy and what the word actually means and why it's important for longevity and what fasting can actually do, and maybe how people should break into it.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I'll preface this by echoing your same sentiment. There's a little part of me that has become somewhat reluctant at how enthusiastic people jump into multi-day fasts, where they just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, I'm going to do a 36-hour fast. I'm going to do even 24. I'm going to do 24. I'm going to do 48-hour fast. And I think, all right, that's fine. But what's more important than how long you fast is how you break your fast. The problem that so many people have, Vinny, is they'll do a 18-hour fast. They'd say, oh, I only do one meal a day. I'm OMAD. I OMAD fast. But that one meal, they get so hungry because they haven't planned well or they haven't adapted well that they just binge and they just eat themselves sick. Literally, they eat themselves sick for that one meal. And it has what's happened is in many people, fasting just turns into kind of a glamorous binge purge cycle where they eat themselves sick, they feel shame, they feel disgusted, and they say, I'm going to fast all day tomorrow. I'm going to clean all this out, and I'm going to be even better, and I'm going to have just a big buttered steak at the end of the day, and that'll be it. Nope. And then they do the same thing again tomorrow. They maybe start with a steak, and then they just keep on rushing through everything. They eat 2 bowls of cereal, they have a piece of cake, they, whatever. So as much as I am an advocate of fasting, for many reasons, including the kind of fortitude, the discipline that you develop, the stoicism, the feelings of I'm actually in charge of this fleshy tabernacle of clay. I'm in charge of this. The part that is really me is in charge of the rest of this stuff. I like that benefit. And of course, the metabolic benefit, which is insulin comes down, ketones come up, you're feeding the brain. Even, Vinny, acutely on the order of 24 to 48 hours, metabolic rate actually goes up. That's a common misunderstanding. A lot of people think metabolic rate goes down during a fast, but in that early stage, the metabolic rate will climb. And so there's a lot of benefits. One of them, of course, is autophagy. As much as we understand it, Vinny, I need to also, another preface to all this, as much as people talk about autophagy, and I've mentioned it several times now, you can't really measure it in humans in a kind of clinical, reliable way. So we're always suspecting autophagy. I am, and confidently doing so, because if insulin is down, autophagy is turned on. And that's thought to be important for longevity. And let me just harp on that for a second, because once again, we have a lot of gurus who focus on dietary protein, and they say that a longevity diet is a diet that is low in protein. Because if protein is low, then a protein called mTOR in the cells of the body, mTOR is turned down. And when mTOR is turned down, autophagy is turned up. And this sentiment isn't without some value. We know in insect studies and in animal studies, if you inhibit mTOR, the animal will live longer. No question. It is exceptionally clear. There should be no debate on that. The evidence is overwhelming. Importantly, we have no evidence like that in humans. There's literally never been a longevity study in humans inhibiting or activating mTOR. Never been done. Never. You could never do it. So we just need to make sure we remember that as much as a scientist like me is going to say inhibiting mTOR can improve longevity in insects and animals, we always need to add that on there. And then we could say, and may promote longevity in humans. Now, it may promote longevity. Some people who have taken that paradigm, maybe taken it too far, and believe that mTOR inhibition will absolutely promote longevity in humans. But nevertheless, the advocates of the inhibiting mTOR for longevity theory will very often be promoting the inhibition of protein consumption. They'll say, eat less protein and you'll turn off mTOR. Well, the tragedy in that view is that the human evidence doesn't support it. The older we get, the less protein we eat, the higher mortality gets. Probably just because you start wasting muscle. You have to eat some amount of protein to keep your muscle there. But even still, Vinny, let's even grant this idea that inhibiting mTOR will be good for longevity. Okay. And so we want to make sure, let's just grant it. So we want to make sure that we activate mTOR sometimes. I mean, we have to activate it sometimes. Otherwise, we can't keep our muscle. Otherwise, we can't make testosterone or estrogens, the sex hormones. We have to have some mTOR activation. But so we would say, well, what activates mTOR too much? Well, it's not protein. You know, you and I could eat a whole load of leucine, which is the most anabolic, muscle building, mTOR activating amino acid there is.
Right.
And mTOR would come up and it would come down in a nice kind of window of time. But what happens when we spike insulin? It's a different matter. When we eat insulin spiking foods, insulin activates mTOR much higher and keeps it much activated for much longer than protein does. And that now could potentially be a problem where mTOR is activated too much, not because of the protein, but because of the insulin spiking foods. And so let's say mTOR is relevant to longevity, all the more reason to keep insulin low. Not only are you keeping mTOR down, which would presumably be allowing autophagy to be turned on, but you're losing weight, you're making ketones to feed your brain, you're keeping your liver leaner and less liver fat, you're helping reduce the formation of plaques in your carotid arteries. So the theory, always, Vinnie, always, it comes back to keep your insulin down.
It almost sounds like an infomercial when we talk about it, right? It's like,
yeah, so go buy my book. Go buy my book. All about insulin resistance, everybody. It's all about go buy Why We Get Sick. You'll love every page of it.
By Ben Bikman. Bikman is spelled Bikman. There's no C in there. Bikman. And by the way, folks, it's in the Vinnie book club over at VinnieTortorich.com. You go to Amazon, you get the book. Why We Get Sick is the book. Ben, it's always a pleasure to have you on, man. We always have a good time, and it always seems to go way too fast. You're welcome back whenever you want to be on. By the way, Ben and is it your brother or your brother?
My brother Joel. Yeah, my brother Joel.
You guys have a product. It's called Health Code, right? HLTH. Is that HLTH? Is just Health Code?
Sure is. Yeah, because no one has time for vowels these days. Yeah, thanks, Vinnie. Yeah, so my brother Joel and I, we always wanted a family business, and so we created a low-carb meal replacement shake. It's awesome. We have a plant-based version coming out sometime soon, you know, because some people don't want any animal protein in it. But yeah, go to the website, HLTH.com, HLTH.com, and you can learn more about it. Use the code Ben if you want a discount.
Yeah, you want to save a ton of money? Put Ben in there, and that's spelled B-E-N, not B-I-N. It's not something you throw trash in, folks. So go check that out. Ben, hang on. I want to say goodbye to you off the air. Folks, you know what to do. We all go shopping on Amazon. Before you go to Amazon, go to VinnieTortorich.com, click through the banner, puts a little coal on the fire, and gets my train down the track. Also, we have a super fan page at VinnieTortorich.com. We were doing that long before people started doing these it's kind of like PBS. I keep this show free. You guys go there, you toss me a couple of bucks. I can pay everyone who works around here, and we keep it going like that. I'm going to turn off just the YouTube.